Hi there, I'm Josh Gishri, and you're listening to Amplify Arlington, a news podcast highlighting local stories and upcoming events. Let's dive into our stories, starting with Doug and the 2026 Patriots Day celebrations.
Arlington celebrated Patriots Day weekend, focusing on remembrance and recognition of the inaugural battle of the American Revolution. Monotony Beer Hall, featuring pints from Arlington Brewing Company, brought over 300 people together in a celebration of live music and local history. Nearby, the Jason Russell House offered open tours that highlighted Monotomy's role as a site of intense fighting during the Revolution. A talk at the Cyrus Dallin Art Museum focused on Dallin's multiple attempts to sculpt a statue of Paul Revere, which took 57 years to complete. The day also included a reenactment of Paul Revere and William Dawes' arrival in Monotomy, drawing renewed attention to the often overlooked William Dawes, as well as to Arlington's lesser-known but significant role in the story of the American Revolution. I'll pass it on to Stuart with the start of EcoFest.
Arlington's EcoFest 2026 officially kicked off on Earth Day and will run through May 23rd, continuing the town's focus on community-driven events and with practical focus. Organized in part by the Arlington Commission for Arts and Culture and local partners, the month-long series highlights sustainability through a mix of workshops, cleanup efforts, and public programming, including a hands-on Go Fish painting workshop at Mystic Open Studios. Environmental talks, local activities, and neighborhood initiatives add up, and Arlington is keeping this effort visible and ongoing. And I'll pass it over to Josh for Earth Day cleanup.
As part of Arlington's Earth Day events, tied directly into Save the Alewife Brook, which drew wider coverage through Associated Press reporting picked up by the New York Times earlier this month, this event centered around the Alewife Brook Community Combined Sewer Overflow Elimination Plan, which points to a larger question. Could a small investment fix the problem? Some advocates argue that if the Massachusetts Water Resources Authority committed roughly $46 more annually per household, it could fully separate stormwater and sewage systems across Arlington, Cambridge, Somerville, Medford, and Malden, reducing overflows and long-term environmental strain. Officials, however, continue to frame the cost as a barrier. Against this political backdrop, volunteers retained focus. Residents of these towns are cleaning up the brook, while the bigger fight continues upstream. Now back to you, Doug, for the Quilters Connection Quilt Guild Show.
The Quilt Show in Arlington brought that same community focus indoors, with Quilters Connection holding its Quilt Guild Show at Arlington Town Hall. Hundreds of quilts filled the space, representing work from across New England, including dozens that will be donated to charities, part of a broader effort that has produced more than 1,000 quilts for veterans and others in need. Quilters Connection, based in Lexington with members throughout the Boston area, has been holding these shows for nearly 50 years, with proceeds supporting its ongoing charitable work.
To hear more about the Earth Day cleanup and the Quilters Connection Quilt Guild Show, be sure to watch ACMi's next newscast. Here's some upcoming events to look forward to.
On Friday, May 8th from 3 to 5 p.m., as part of EcoFest, Arlington High School will be hosting its annual Eco Fair. This event is open to the public and brings together live music, food, crafts, lawn games, public art, and a range of activities led by students involved in environmental initiatives. It's a community-focused afternoon that puts student leadership and sustainability front and center.
On Saturday, May 9th, from 11 a.m. to 2 p.m., the APS LGBTQIA+ Rainbow Task Force, along with Elementary School Rainbow Alliances, Middle School QSAs, and the Arlington High School GSA, are hosting the 4th annual district-wide Pride Celebration in Arlington. The event brings together students, families, and staff from across the district for a shared community gathering focused on inclusion and visibility, with activities and programming led by student groups at multiple school levels.
Also on Saturday, May 9th, from 9 a.m. to noon, a plant sale benefiting Arlington Eats will take place at the Mill Cafe. The event offers heirloom and specialty vegetable plants grown by a local gardener, with all proceeds going towards food assistance programs. It's a small, practical fundraiser built around the idea that growing your own food can also support neighbors who need it.
On Wednesday, May 13th, from 7 to 8 p.m., Mystic Valley Action for Reproductive Justice is hosting a book talk and signing at the Robbins Library Community Room. The event features authors Loretta J. Ross and Marlene Gerber Fried discussing their new book, Abortion and Reproductive Justice, An Essential Guide for Resistance. The event is structured as a community conversation and signing, with an RSVP requested in advance.
We hope you check out these local events if you've got time. Now let's turn our attention to our op-ed piece. Well, the first thing I want to talk about today is something that happened in our most recent newscast and something that appeared in our community calendar as well on the newscast. So I had the chance to go with one of our news interns. So I got the chance to go with one of our news interns, Francisca Baduya, to the Riverside Revelry Renaissance Fair. And the amount of times I had to say that was rough. But it was such a fun event that we got to go to. It was, I believe, the second annual event that they put on at the Charles Speedway. And for a newscast that wants to not only cover things that are happening in Arlington, but also that are, interesting things that are in the greater Boston area that people can go out to, people can check out and explore. It was super fun. Highly recommend if you get the chance to go to the Brighton Bazaar where it was held. They had, as you can see in the newscast, a lot of great food, drinks from Notch Brewing, and performers. So it was a lot of fun to be a part of, like, sharing that experience with the intern and like figuring out how we were going to make that story of the day of as we were exploring it. Also in that vein, we talked about on the newscast the rummage sale that happened at the Park Avenue Congregational Church that occurred
Right next door.
Right next door.
Right across from ACMi. Yeah.
And I went to go check that out. All the proceeds were charitable donations, and everything that was being sold was also donations that they accepted. So it was actually really big. I wasn't expecting it to be like, as many people showing up or as many things that were selling. There was a huge hall that was filled with just boutique clothing, which was separated from women's and children's clothing, and also separated from a rack of men's clothing. So I unfortunately didn't find anything specifically that fit me because the selection wasn't very large. But I saw people leaving with like handfuls of things. So. Wow. And someone walked away with a giant pair of boots. So there was definitely something for everyone.
Find some treasures there,
Yeah.
for sure, right?
I forgot to ask, did you see any sewing machines?
I did not see any sewing machine. I was specifically on the lookout for anything fabric related for you, Stuart.
Next time.
Yeah.
Suddenly I also want to know that, and this may be the topic of another show, the difference between, like, what's a rummage sale versus, are there rules? Is there a rule? What is a rummage sale versus a tag sale versus a flea market versus, all those different things?
Yeah.
A bazaar, is a bazaar also part of it too? I don't know. Rummage sale, I do, I guess, associate with churches, right? The church rummage sale. But sometimes they have a thrift sale. Sometimes seems to be a lot of different words for this type of phenomenon of a sale, right? That people donate.
Well, and it's also very particular to region, because I know when I moved from the West Coast to Connecticut, it was the flip, and we knew everything as garage sales or yard sales.
Yep.
And then it was suddenly, we're going to a tag sale this weekend.
Tag sale, right?
Like, tag sale.
What is that?
What is a tag sale?
I don't think I've ever heard tag sale.
Yeah. It's very, very hyper specific to here.
Interesting.
So I was like, what is it? But when you think about it, it makes a lot of sense.
It does.
That it's like you putting tags on things. So
yeah,
anything that's tagged is for sale.
That's right.
But also, like, it was in someone's yard, so it was a yard sale, or it was out of someone's garage, so it was a garage sale. So yeah, there's a lot of ways to say the same thing.
Yeah.
I promise to look into that and report back.
back.
Yeah, I'll report back.
Great.
On that. Yeah, for sure.
Awesome. So I guess there were two things I wanted to bring up. So one of them was the Arlington Brewing Company won at the 2026 World Beer Cup, and they earned a gold award for the English mild category, which I had to look up because I actually don't know what an English mild is. Apparently, it's a British ale with a malt forward profile, light body, and low hop bitterness, which actually sounds exactly like what I like in a beer. But also, we had mentioned on a previous episode I had Arlington Brewing Company beer recently. I don't know which one exactly, but it was very good. So I'm honestly not surprised.
It would be so funny to me if you eventually get to taste that and it's
the same one.
It's
Yeah.
the one that
I'll
won.
know,
It's
yeah.
like you're like, oh, it was. That's why it was so good. It was award-winning levels of good.
Yeah. So I am actually looking forward to going out and grabbing that probably today. Honestly. So that's pretty cool. And then the other thing was this is a little more below the radar. There's a bill HR 2289, which is called the American Broadband Deployment Act. And we're more aware of it because we work in community access. But essentially the gist of it is like cable companies would have more power over like local government decisions. So basically, if a local government doesn't make a decision about, whether a telephone pole goes up or a cell tower goes up, if they don't make a decision to approve or deny it within a certain amount of time, that defaults to yes, which is called deemed granted, is like the term they use for it. But more importantly for us in community access, like hidden in the bill is this vague implication that cable companies would no longer have to pay franchise fees to access stations, which is like really important because that's actually our funding model. Like community access stations exist. For those who aren't aware, community access stations exist on the funding, partly that's provided by cable companies, and it's just like a small cut of what they make to support like local journalism and like platforming voices that didn't have to pay.
Right.
To
And
like
to
get a
be
platform.
specific with that too, because it's not like these companies are willing to do that. They are forced to pay these fees to pay for community access stations. They would, and especially with the language that's in HR 2289 is overriding that requirement that they have to be able to support what we do and what stations across the country do.
Yeah. So it's vague because it's saying that new contracts for the franchise fees wouldn't have to be negotiated, which basically means they could not happen. And then also, I think it was saying that the cable companies might not have to obey previous contracts. So I'm still learning a lot about it, but it's something that's on our radar that kind of came out of nowhere, seemingly, and now we're, and it's going to be voted on in 2 weeks, I think, in Congress. And then if it gets approved, it's 6 months before it's enacted. But there's about 2 weeks for people to call their representatives and tell them. So I implore the viewer, call your representatives voicing concern about HR 2289.
Yeah. I think too, the way that it affects a lot of people that aren't, maybe not as invested as in the community access stations as I hope they are. It also impacts just the town because requiring the town's consent for everything, and then taking that away, so where the town is automatically consenting for something, means that they can ignore things like historical buildings that exist in town. They can ignore nature preserves and places that are environmentally sensitive, and they can do whatever they want in those spaces if they can pass through without getting a no, pretty much. And I think that's the scary thing that is just impacting residents, not necessarily those who are, community access oriented.
I think speaking of companies being forced to do or not to do things, I'll bring up Happy May Day as we record this today. International May Day originally came from the Haymarket situation in Chicago in I think it was 1886, in where people were trying to fight for an 8-hour workday and for good working conditions. And so just wanted to hope people, think about that this year. If you're listening to this or watching this, after May Day, it's always a good day to, help your neighbors and your family who are working people and help them, have a good situation at work. Something to think about, and can do that in a number of different ways to support them. But that's something that we think about today, I think, and a lot of different events happening today and around the country and around the world. It's a world holiday, actually. So I wanted to mention that.
Nice.
And then if I can mention a couple of Arlington Historical Society events that are coming up that sound interesting. One is on May 26th from 7:30 to 8:30, and it's going to be at Arlington Historical Society, 7 Jason Street. It's called Daily Life in Monotony in the Aftermath of April 19th, 1775. So what I thought was interesting about this is it says you often hear about the day of. This is the day after, and what the impacts of it was. And I like one part of the description was interesting is how did Monotony, then a rural precinct of Cambridge, and I think I'm going to call Arlington rural Cambridge every once in a while now because I like that. How did they recover from the shocking episodes and carry on while war is still raging in Boston? So that sounds like a good event, and so I want to mention that. And the other one is on May 28th from 7 to 9 at Arlington High School. It's called Reexamining Our Roots, the Declaration of Independence at 250. A couple different historians, someone from Arlington High School who's a teacher there, open to the public, completely free, refreshments provided. Sounds like a fun event. And also I should say there's a ACMi podcast called Riding with Revere that someone at this table, me, was a part of
What?
was a part of creating with Jennifer Coe, who's also been a part of the podcast group early on when we were starting working with the podcast group. We put this together as a little project. So that's wherever you get your podcasts, the same place you're hearing this. So take a listen to that while you're listening to these other and going to these other events.
Very good.
Awesome.
Very good plug.
Yeah, why not?
But I do think it is really cool how many events are hosted by the Historical Society here and the work that they're doing in town. I've had, such a limited experience of being in Arlington and not being from here. And I had the opportunity to cover all those events for the Patriots Day weekend that was not too long ago. And it was very cool to hear about the impact and like the forgotten history of Monotony and what that meant for the American Revolution.
Absolutely. And I, having not lived here for a very long time, grew up here, but then came back, noticing how these historical societies in Arlington and every town, probably every town in New England, is just keeps going and keeps breathing new life into the history, right? Like you said, finding these untold stories and other aspects of it. I think it's fascinating. I'm so glad they're still around, and hopefully they'll keep going and going, right? And keep discovering new things and telling us about the old things.
And I think it's a great resource for anyone that is even remotely interested in history or local politics or national politics to be able to go to these kinds of events that are held. I know that, again, living from the West Coast, I'm going to keep pointing out that I'm not from here. Living in the West Coast, a lot of it was about, early history classes were, we go through the American Revolutionary War, the Civil War, we do all the basic history, but we get hung up on, the gold rush because of how important that was for the West and what that meant for settling in the West and conflict in the West. And, eventually the manifest destiny is spreading that way. But when I was growing up here, so much of the history that we were focused on was the birth of a nation and getting started. So while you're here and you have all these resources, I think it's really important to take as much in as you can.
Yep.
And then, if you ever get the chance, which I hope that everyone gets the chance to, if you can go somewhere different and you can figure out what it's like historically from those perspectives and from those areas, and you get a broader sense and a better sense of the history of what it took. And this is, not extending beyond what you could say. It could go even more globally in other cultures and other places, but even just traveling within the United States, it's so big, and being able to go to historical societies and those who are holding on to history and those who are spreading that history in different pockets of this country, you get a much, much richer sense of what it took for us to get to where we are. And, it's clearly not perfect, and we're very aware of what's happening. But it is amazing how far we've come.
Yeah, and you can, not to say that there aren't new things in the world, there are, but you can learn so much from history that, has things that have happened that are happening today that you think are very unique, and not necessarily,
Yeah.
right? It's happened before, and we've dealt with it and worked with it and overcome it, and sometimes not overcome it, right? But
Mm-hmm.
it's been part of us.
That is really interesting what you said about the history being different, like it's taught differently in different schools. Because when I think about it, most of what I know from West Coast history is from like, I don't know, like Blood Meridian, like Cormac McCarthy, but also like I'm trying to think like as I go across the U.S., you know, like is it Fire and Brimstone about the coal mine disaster?
Yes.
And,
Yeah.
is it
Yeah.
Butte? And then Killers of the Flower Moon, again, more
I'm,
like
I'm
central.
sensing a theme.
Yeah, but like it's interesting because I never thought about schools in those areas talking about any of those subjects. I kind of just assumed that you're like, you know, going through middle school and high school and everybody's being taught basically the same thing. But
Yeah.
I guess that's really not true.
Well, and it's like when I remember, or with some early memories of like dressing up with like the tricorn hat and everything here. But in California, we had a project on the missions, and so we had to recreate like the Spanish churches that popped up across, and you had to like pick a church and talk the history about that church.
Wow,
Yeah.
see, that's interesting. Yeah.
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 I love to tell people about how growing up here for field trips, you know, that might be the only time that like I feel like I would go to Paul Revere's house, right? I wouldn't necessarily go there on my own because it's, you know, it's around here, so you didn't have to really don't think about it too much, right?
Mhm.
Which we're saying not to do this, right?
Yeah.
Saying do much more intentional stuff than that. But I always love to tell people about being on a elementary school field trip to the Salem Witch Museum. And my memory of that now, you know, how much of that is real history, I can't remember. But what I remember is I was on a field trip, you know, school field trip, Salem Witch Museum, and my memory of it is standing on a pentagram with the whole class, standing on a pentagram, you know, with like bad audio animatronic witches like around the top, like that light up, and it's like a puppet, and it's kind of, you know, bad like. Oh my God, amazing. Like in retrospect, I think I appreciate it better now than I did at the time.
Yeah.
But the idea too that, you know, that's a local thing, right? Being able to go and do that.
Yeah.
And also today, what class would probably be allowed to stand on a pentagram? Like,
Right. Yeah. Like that is a very specific moment in time.
Right. The 70s, maybe. That's what that was. But that's interesting. Local. You got your California history. I mean, talking about the gold rush, I just thought to myself, I really don't know anything. I don't think I know anything about the gold rush.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
That it happened, but, you know, outside
Very
of movies.
little, yeah, because mostly here we went to Plymouth, and you get to see the reenactors, and then so like, I never thought that is really just the New England experience, and also I grew up in Maine, and we still did, you know, we made the field trip to come here go
Right.
to that, so. But yeah, I mean, like everything I know about West Coast is all from books that I've read, 20s onwards. So they don't teach that.
Or probably movies, you know,
movies,
westerns,
all kinds of media that have portrayed it in a certain way, but then it becomes like the way that we understand what happened.
Right.
Or it's like, oh, everything must have been like the Western movies. Like, no, actually, there's a reason that it's cinema.
I mean, even Cormac McCarthy, I question some of the legitimate.
Sure. And then it goes into like, I wonder, because I don't have that perspective of like being taught in the South about history from the South's perspective and the struggles from the South's perspective too. Because I think we hear a lot about things changing in terms of education state to state and like the standards that people have and the required readings that they have. But in that kind of like basic history that they're fascinated with, like the American Revolution is here, the gold rush is there. What was it like in the South?
Right. Yeah, there's a book, and I just really should look it up and say the title of it, but there's a book that just came out that I have on hold at the library that's about the period, basically the Reconstruction period, you know, from the Civil War 20 or 30 years out to the turn of the century, and about how interesting it is that period doesn't get taught very much in too much detail either, but yet that was a very interesting period where, you know, there was African American and Black representation in the South, right? Where
Yeah.
things are very different there than they changed and became later, right? So it's again these untold stories and these periods that we don't always learn about. And yeah, how do they learn about that in the South? How do they learn about their own
Yeah.
history down there? That's still to this day controversial. Maybe is
Right.
that what it might be?
Yeah, even in Destiny of the Republic, which was about James Garfield,
Oh, great book.
they cover James Garfield in the North a lot, but they actually don't really go in depth into the experience of being in the South.
That is something that is really lost to history a lot of the times, and I think getting that makes it where you can from historical documents and accounts, that it makes it so much more meaningful than you have that understanding of these differences of opinions and different perspectives and things that were being discussed and people that were, making waves before there was a movement behind them,
Right.
before there were things that, they could affect. They were still trying. And I think that's one of the most fascinating things with history. I will actively plug if you want to watch anything about kind of an untold history. PBS has a YouTube channel, and a few of them. And one of the shows on there that I love is called Rogue History, and it's the history of the American Revolution and American history told through the perspective of lesser known people that basically were so impactful to making us America. I think it's such a cool take on our history. I highly recommend it. Thanks for listening to Amplify Arlington. If you missed anything or want to listen again, find us on ACMi's YouTube page or wherever you get your podcasts. ACMi, focused on you.
Heck yeah. It's rural Cambridge.
It's rural Cambridge. So what you once was swamp.